I wrote him back what the relationship was, and I said, but Ancestry must have made a mistake because I know all my first cousins. I literally grew up with them. We were walking distance to each other. My father's siblings were as close as any family could be. There's no secrets in our family, but good luck to you.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. Today, I have a treat for you. We have on the podcast our first centenarian. Her name is Millie Mandel, and she is adorable. She's a little hard of hearing, a little hard of seeing. And so if you are watching this on YouTube, you might see her squinting up really close to the Zoom camera, and it's just the cutest thing ever. Now, here's how I got to know Millie. I have a genealogy friend that I met at a conference. Her name is Linda Goldman, and Linda found Millie on her Ancestry DNA match list. And the story that unfolds as they try to figure out how they are related to one another involves one of Millie's grandsons and several of Linda's cousins. And it's really kind of a fascinating story when you put it all together. So I'm excited for you to listen to that. The other voice that you'll hear here is Millie's son, Marty. Marty joins Millie not just to help her navigate the technology, but because his perspective on the story is also a really important part of the narrative. So I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Linda Goldman and Marty and Millie Mandel. Well, thank you both for being here. Linda, I would love to have you share with us a little bit about how you got started in family history.
So my interest in family history started for real about 6 to 8 years ago. I knew very little about where either side of my paternal grandparents came from. And so I started asking questions. And by that time, there was really not very many people left of the older generation. But I was fortunate. There was a man from the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw who came to San Francisco and offered a free genealogy consultation to anyone who had Polish Jewish roots. So I immediately signed up for it. My brother and I went. We met him armed with the names of my father's side of the family came from Poland, name of the town and my grandparents' names. That's it. And he looked at the name Goldman and he said, oh, well, that's sort of like looking for Smith or Jones in the U.S., but let's see what we can do. Types in a few things and literally 5 minutes later said, oh, there they are. And suddenly we had my grandparents' birth record, my great-grandparents' birth records, and names of yet another generation back. Started me on a quest. So I started building a family tree on Ancestry. And then I thought, well, I guess I'll just do my DNA also and see what happens. And so I would have been very surprised if anything came back that was other than Eastern European Jewish. And sure enough, it came back that way. It was 99% at that point. Now it's 100. But so I gave a DNA kit to my brother and my sister, and we matched. We're siblings. And a first cousin also did his DNA on Ancestry. He matched. And then I came to find out that a first cousin's son had also done his DNA on Ancestry. That's how I got started. And it's just, my interest has just grown since then.
So you took the DNA test just kind of out of a little bit of curiosity. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And you recognized the names at the top of the list. But one of the challenges, of course, with Jewish family history, particularly as it relates to DNA, is because of so many hundreds of years of intermarriage within that very specific community, oftentimes you end up with tens or hundreds of thousands of DNA matches who all look like they share a lot of DNA with you, but really it's because they're related to you multiple times across several family lines way back in history. And so oftentimes those close matches appear closer than they should be. So as you looked at that DNA match list, how long ago was it that you took the test before you got connected to a match that was kind of a curious thing for you?
Well, so I think I did the DNA test probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And then every now and then I'll get, oh, you're matched with somebody, and nothing ever really connects or pops up. As I said, I have a couple of second cousins on my mother's side that I know are second cousins. And I actually connected with one of them who lives in Europe, and we recognized the birth name of my maternal grandmother, and we have since become friends as well. And I visited them outside of Amsterdam. So that's been a really fun adventure as well.
That's so fun. So then, Millie, would you tell us a little bit about, you took a DNA test and what was the impetus for that? Why did you do that?
Well, it all started with an invitation to a luncheon that my cousin was giving her cousin also. She was moving to Florida, so the cousins met for lunch at her home. Her name was Frances, and there were probably about 7 of us, first cousins. It was very nice, and we talked, and Fran mentioned that her daughter had adopted 2 sons, 2 boys, and they were giving her a rough time. They were teenagers. And then she said, they weren't like you and Grandma Lisa, Millie. You never gave Grandma any problems when you were adopted. And suddenly, after 57 years, I heard the word adopted.
So you were 57 years old when you first heard that news?
Yes.
And what did you think in that moment? Or
well, my Aunt Bessie was sitting to the right. She knew that I didn't know anything. It had never been mentioned to me in the 57 years of my life. But she said to me, Millie, come to lunch tomorrow and I will tell you everything I know, and I know very little. But that's how I found out I was adopted.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your family.
Growing up, we lived the first 10 years. Well, actually, the first year, it was in a apartment, group of Jewish people who knew each other in Romania, where they came from, had moved to Cleveland and had lived in this apartment building. And my mother and father brought home a little 2-month-old baby that they had adopted. That was me. And so the families there, all the Jewish families, made parties. And my mother said it lasted. My mother didn't tell me. Aunt Bessie told me it lasted about 2 days. Everybody cooked and they just enjoyed each other and enjoyed having the baby there. And the next, that was in a apartment building, I would say, between Woodland and Scoville. And we lived there for a while, and then we moved. I don't know how my father got this, but he bought a 2-family home in Garfield Heights, Ohio. The streets weren't even paved, and my mother had told me. And we lived there 10 years.
And tell me what year you were born.
1924.
Okay.
I'm 100.
You were 100 years old. That's amazing. So
January 3rd, I became 100.
That's so impressive. You said your father was able to purchase a home. How did the Depression affect your family?
Shortly afterward, my father lost his business and the home, and we had to move to an apartment in the Jewish section of Cleveland in an apartment building. So by then I was, I would say 10, 11 years old. I was the only Jewish child, but I enjoyed singing. So I was in the chorus group, and the teacher, who was the choral director, noticed that I enjoyed it and had a pleasant voice. So she gave me the hero part in plays that we made. And I did a lot of singing in Garfield Heights.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. So your family had gone from this Jewish community or this apartment building in Cleveland where
Yes.
you were surrounded by people who had the same background as you. Then you'd moved to Garfield Heights where you were the only Jew in your school. And
That's right. And then back,
challenges.
Then back to a Jewish community where I remember going to Patrick Henry Junior High and then on to John Hay, and where I met my husband-to-be, and we got married.
How old were you?
19. My husband was 3 years older. One day he said to me, "Are you interested in finding out anything about your history?" I said, "Not really. I had such wonderful parents. I would never." He said, "Well, I'm a little interested." He says, "Do you mind?" I said, "No, I'd be very interested." So he started inquiring, and Marty's son, Aaron, became interested in it and asked me how much I would like to do it. I said, "Well, whatever you do, I'm interested." The next week he came, he said, "I need some saliva." I said, "Fine." And the following 10 days or so, he came to me with a beautiful wedding picture of my birth mother.
Wow. So Millie, I'm going to pause you right there because I want to go back to Linda and I want to hear her side of this story. Linda, as Millie's over here with a grandson encouraging her to take all the DNA tests and start to explore her family history, you saw her show up as a DNA match to you. Tell me about that experience for you.
So I didn't actually see it, but I did receive an email from Aaron through Ancestry who said, and I'll condense it a little bit. He said, "I've been researching the birth history of my wonderful," she was 94, 95-year-old grandmother who found out very late in life that she was adopted. And you pop up as a first cousin. And I wrote him and he said, "By the way, do you know these other people?" And the other people were my brother, my sister, my first cousin, and my first cousin's son. I said, "Yes, I do happen to know them." And so I wrote him back what the relationship was. And I said, but Ancestry must have made a mistake because I know all my first cousins. I literally grew up with them. We were walking distance to each other. My father's siblings were as close as any family could be. There's no secrets in our family, but good luck to you. So I didn't hear back from him for about a week. And I thought, okay, he's exploring other avenues. And I want to tell you that it was 5 years ago tomorrow that the email came in that said, thank you for the information. Based on what you have told us, we've been consulting with a professional genealogist and she has put it together. I read this email and I literally sat down on the floor. I couldn't breathe. It was so incredibly powerful and strange to me. As it turns out, my father was 9 years old when they left Poland. He left with his brother, who was, I believe 11, a younger brother, and 2 older sisters. They set foot in the U.S. on September 22nd, 1923. And what Aaron was able to put together and surmise based on the DNA relationships that Millie's birth mother was my father's oldest sister.
And I did that math right, correctly, right? Like they came in September. She was
born in January.
Yeah.
So my Aunt Tilly was 6 months pregnant on the boat, which must have been an incredibly difficult journey for her. So apparently what happened was they arrived in Pittsburgh, where my grandfather was already living. He had emigrated to the U.S. 2 years prior to that. And he had a sister who was living in Cleveland. So I'm going, oh, bingo, that makes sense. And so we pieced it together. Now, on this very day the night before, when Aaron's email came in, I was leaving on a major trip the next day. So I'm trying to pack and call my siblings and call my cousins and get this all put together. And we had a sense of shock, but like, oh my God, we need to meet this family. We need to talk. So the next morning I called Aaron. We had this most amazing conversation on the phone. It's like, what do we even say to each other? These 2 families that have each done their DNA, living without knowing anything about each other, all of a sudden we have all these ties with each other. And I called the cousin who is the son of the first cousin, whose DNA matched more closely with my aunt than any of us as first cousins. So I called him, and he was so excited. The joy in his voice was just amazing. He said, give me their number. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to call them. So he called Aaron and immediately connected with his Aunt Millie. And he immediately sent some photos. We all kind of gathered photos, and we all started sharing stories about Aunt Tilly. My first email with Aaron, I said, I am really overjoyed about this. I think my cousins and my siblings will be as well. I can't speak for anybody else, but I will do my best to make some connections. And everyone was just so receptive on my side of the family. And it's like, oh, we have a whole new family that we can't wait to meet. So we all just looked through our archives of photos and sent as many as we could. And my initial email with Aaron, and I said, no matter what happens, I want you to know that my Aunt Tilly was a wonderful, compassionate, kind, giving person, and it must have pained her indescribably to have given up a child that she could not talk about. Nobody in my family had ever had any suspicions of this. It was not something that was talked about. As I mentioned, my father was 9 coming over on the boat. Did he know that his sister was pregnant? Aunt Tilly had her sister, Mary, was 2 years younger. She certainly knew that Tilly was pregnant. Nobody ever talked about it. So it just was a family story that was hidden for all these years, and thanks to DNA, it was uncovered.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing your side of that story. Millie, as you looked at that photo the first time, what were your thoughts and feelings looking into the face of your birth mother?
I'll be very honest with you. I had such strong feelings for my parents that I looked at this woman and I felt sorry for her, that she had to go through the experience of giving up a child, not realizing that I'm thinking about myself, but that this woman, who is my birth mother, went through the agony of giving up a child. And the thought became bigger that she was my birth mother. And I have other pictures and things. She was interested in embroidery, and through her family, and she has a sister-in-law in Los Angeles who I spoke to for maybe over an hour, who knew Tilly, but never, ever, ever was Tilly's name or her family told to me. Or if my mother probably knew some things, she never told me, except there was a phrase in Yiddish. I don't know if you understand Yiddish.
A little.
But she told me this. Says, nicht the Mama was hat das Kind. Says, the Mama was reared this Kind. To tell you what it means in English, it's not the mother who gives birth to the child. It's the mother who raises the child.
So your mom would say that phrase, and what she was really saying was, I raised you. I didn't birth you, but you didn't know that.
She never told me, and it never dawned on me. She told me that if I was upset about something and maybe being naughty, she would put her arms around me and hold me and kiss me and love me, and then she'd say, Malkala, my Jewish name, says, nicht the Mama was hat das Kind, says the Mama was reared this Kind. And I listened to her and I learned to say the phrase, but I never, ever felt the idea that this woman is not my birth mother.
Yeah, wow. So as information about Tilly and photos started coming out and stories, in addition to that information that you now have about Tilly, you also started to gain relatives, more family. Tell me about that.
Wonder. They opened up their arms to me, every single one of them, and made me feel a part of the family.
Marty, we haven't talked to you a lot, but I would just be really curious to hear, obviously your mother was in her 50s when she found out she was adopted. So you were already, I suspect, an adult by that point. And then to watch her over the last several years go through this experience. Tell me what that's been like for you.
Well, I think if we pick up the story at the time that my mom finds out in her 50s she's adopted, so my father and my mother invite me, my wife, my brother, his wife, my sister, and her husband over. We have something to tell you. So all the kids got on the phone. What's going on? Why are they having us all come over? And we come over, and Mom sits there and tells us the story and find what she's just found out she's adopted. And my response is, this is very upsetting because Grandma Lisa, who's obviously passed on, was the only one with longevity. She lived to be 90 years old. Everybody on my father's side, 50s, 60s, heart attacks, strokes, whatever. Where am I going to get longevity from if I don't have Grandma Lisa's genes anymore? So my father picked up the ball, and obviously DNA was not available and only was able to take it so far. And then my father passed away, and the ball just got dropped. And my son, what is this now, 2018, starts gaining an interest, wants to know more about the family, tries to establish a family tree. And so we went with Ancestry.com. And that's when we got, a week or so later, all these hits from Linda and her family. And they opened their arms to us. It's just overwhelming how open they were, because you hear enough stories where, gee, this may not be what it is. DNA made a mistake. DNA did not make a mistake. This is my mom's family. Who knew? It was just what a benefit and what gratitude we have, because it was a secret. It was a shanda, as they said, to talk about adoption at that time when Mom was adopted in 1924.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. Linda, do you have a favorite memory of your Aunt Tilly?
Not one. I have many. So most of the family, all the Goldman siblings, lived in Pittsburgh, except for Aunt Tilly and her family, who lived in Connecticut. But every summer, we would make a pilgrimage from Pittsburgh. We'd stop in Connecticut, visit them. My mother's sister lived in New York, and then we'd go visit my mother's parents in Massachusetts. But as a child, and I have two postcards, one from when I was 8 and one from when I was 10. And my parents let me stay in Connecticut with Aunt Tilly and the family. And I look back on, and they lived very close to a beach. Aunt Tilly went to the beach every day. She would play canasta with her women friends. I would paddle around in the water, and she treated me like a daughter. And I, now in my life, I look back and I wonder if she thought of me as the daughter she never had. She had 3 sons, as I mentioned, and she and I connect. I had a relationship with her that was a very special person.
I wish I had known her.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you got some of the best parts of her, and now you have a family that she has given you, siblings and cousins. And I think that's just so beautiful as you continue those relationships. Linda, I'm going to just ask you one last question. As you think about this experience and meeting Millie and being able to connect all those dots, what is it that you hope for the future?
So a few years ago, I was telling the story to a group of friends. And one of the questions that came up was that the question to me was, well, how do you think Aunt Tilly would react to knowing that her secret was not a secret anymore? And I said two things. I said, first of all, I think that she would be thrilled to know that her daughter had a great life, that she is the epitome of a life well lived. And I think Aunt Tilly would be thrilled to know that. And I think she would be equally thrilled to know that our family's connected and that we have such a warm relationship. What I hope to gain is, for me personally, telling stories, and Krista, you're the champion of all of this. Stories is really important. I have a family tree that goes back now 6 or 7 generations, and I have names, and I have for some of them, I have dates of birth and dates when they died, but I don't know their stories. And hearing this story just fills me with love. And it's something that is important to me to pass on to future generations. I don't have children of my own. I have nieces and nephews, and I hope to instill to them 100 years from now, when somebody's asking questions, well, who were they? They'll have more of an idea of who we are and what we have passed down. I think keeping memories alive is just a very important part of what I do.
That was so beautifully said. Thank you. Marty, Millie, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Linda, thank you for bringing this story to my attention. And thank you all for taking the time to be with us today.